Welcome to Ethical Edge Insights, Conversations with Changemakers, a space for deeply reflective conversations with those shaping our world. Here we explore their journeys, their greatest challenges, their most significant contributions to date, the contributions they seek to make, and how ethics have shown up along the way. Join us as we uncover the stories that shape our shared future. So thank you, Mike, for joining me here for this chat. We got here eventually. And I'm just reflecting back to when we first met, and it was when I asked you to co-author for a chapter in the positive psychology coaching in the workplace chapter. It was a meaning chapter, yeah. And so I was just what comes to mind was just how funny you were on Friday nights with quick flickbacks to Yannick and myself. And it made that journey enjoyable, given the long hours that it took to bring that book to bear. So it was fun. And so we know that you're the big guy on meaning. That's why we invited you to co-author in that chapter. But I'd like you to tell us more about yourself, but maybe start from the beginning, where you came from to get to where you are.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me, and thanks for inviting me to jump on that topic of meaning-focused coaching. I think it's really an interesting idea. And of course, you mentioned Yannick Jakob, who's, taken that mantle on with his existential coaching. And I think it feels very necessary to try to figure out a way to be able to coach around these big questions that life seems to just keep turning the heat up on right now. But it's interesting that you ask where did I come from to get here. I grew up in the 70s and 80s in the United States. Most of that time was spent in a rural area and kind of in this Cold War thing that we don't think about too much anymore, but it was definitely a world where my political awakening was into a world of good and bad, and everyone seemed to have figured everything out. And that good and bad sort of seemed to filter into who was part of society and who wasn't. And it was just surprising to me growing up in this rural place that there seemed to be, not that there weren't, but that there seemed to be so few people who were as confused and curious as I felt myself to be. When we were in the United States, we have a dark history about how we acquired the land that we live on and that we call our country. And I grew up in an area where, that history was less than 100 years old. And for some reason, because of my family or because of my own little inklings, I realized that like we were kind of living where some other people had been living, and that started this idea of like, well, why doesn't anyone talk about this? Or how do other people think about this? What are we going to do about this? And that stretched to everything. I just was curious about, and a little bit, I guess a little bit nervous about how are we supposed to figure out what's important? How are we supposed to figure out what's real? How do we figure out where it's okay to agree? And then how do we figure out where it's okay to disagree? Because I just was shocked with the certainty that these people from some little town in the middle of nowhere felt about everything. You know, they knew what the world was like, where it came from, all the rules. They knew who was breaking the right rules and who was ignoring the right rules. And I didn't really know any of that. So that is how I got here. How do we do this? How do people come up with their own solution to the big question of what is life and what am I supposed to do with it? So it's just as simple as that. I just kept following that in every little phase of my life, and eventually some of that cohered into a thing we can call a career, I guess. Yeah.
When did so you studied psychology?
Kind of, yeah, yeah, yeah. Not on
Kind
purpose. Not on purpose necessarily. I declared my psychology major when I was at the registrar's office of my little liberal arts college, and they said I couldn't register for the next semester until I declared a major. And so I asked, what do I have the most credits in? And they said psychology. I said I'll do that as my major. And it's like I didn't realize, as is so often the case, I didn't realize the consequences those choices would have, that choice would have. So then, yeah, then I was kind of committed to it, and I found almost everything interesting. So I was always able to find psychology interesting. I wouldn't say it's the most interesting thing in the world, but it was interesting enough for me. So yeah, that's how I ended up in psychology, was that, whatever that process was.
Yeah. And so did you step out of academia or you just continued on through academia?
No, there were big gaps. And not particularly like exciting gaps. Like I didn't go backpacking through, Nepal or something like that. I just was like kicking around Minnesota. I was living in Minnesota. So after I graduated from my undergrad, um, I just started picking up kind of psychology relevant jobs. So I worked in a group home for adults with developmental disabilities and severe and profound mental illness is what they call it at the time. And that seemed relevant. It seemed helpful to the world in some way. And then I was going to go to graduate. I was no, I was going to go just move to the desert. I was like just tired of things. I was going to move to the desert, and then I fell in love and followed my now wife out to Oregon and decided to go to graduate school. And then that program fell apart, so I got a job. Whatever the first job someone offered me, I took. And that was a drug and alcohol counselor in a high school because I had been training to be a therapist. And then I just wanted to be able to do more cognitively stimulating stuff and a little bit less emotionally demanding stuff.
Mm.
And so I wanted to go finish my PhD in counseling psychology so I could do assessment and supervision. And then I just caught the research bug when I was in graduate school. So I didn't start my PhD program until I was 30. So that's a pretty big gap because I was always young for my grade. So
Mm.
there's like a 10-year gap between graduating, almost a 10-year gap between graduating with my bachelor's and starting anything close to what I'm doing now. So not particularly intentional.
You'd be surprised with some of the stories I've been listening to, and they're fascinating. And I think it's that we don't realize how interesting our stories are and what people can take away from them. Just because we're
Hmm.
used to just living what we know what they are and we live them, but other people hear them and they can be fascinated by them
Hmm.
and learn from them. So the PhD was on what exactly? And just before you answer that, I just want to say I have a feeling that I said Yannick's name wrong and you corrected me back earlier when we were just talking. And if I did, sorry, Yannick, if you ever listen to this, but thank you. It's coming out right now.
I
So,
don't think you did. I think you just said Yannick, but
ah,
I always have to stop myself from saying Yannick Noah, the French tennis player. So I think I said Yannick Jakob correctly, but yeah.
you said
What
it
do you
correctly.
feel about
I wasn't sure about myself. So tell me about your PhD and how you got into the topic, because I don't know what it was on.
Yeah. So when I started my first PhD program, I ended up gravitating towards doing psychotherapy with folks who had undergone trauma. So I was doing a lot of trauma work, and I was inspired by existential folks because they were speaking the language most clearly related to mine.
Mm,
And in trauma, you see that for some folks, what happens to them is that their image, their beliefs, or what some people call their assumptive worlds are shattered by the trauma. Like something happens that just can't be fit within how they think the world is supposed to operate. And
mm,
then if that's the case with those folks, then that work is fascinating of trying to parse apart what happened there, what was broken, what do you want to rebuild, what can you rebuild? And it occurred to me that that was a process that was close to what, if you reverse engineer that process, they had absorbed or created or dutifully constructed or something an assumptive world in the first place, right? So um, then I was working with high schoolers and all that exciting stuff went out the window for the most part. I mean, there's some very fascinating uh, folks to work with, and of course, some deeply moving experiences to be a part of as a therapist with that group. But When I went to graduate school, I was looking into working on the field of post-traumatic growth, which is essentially around that concept that people, some part of that in that rebuilding process, like you can heal back stronger. Not the same, but you heal back stronger in some ways. And you know, that idea though, that how did we get those assumptive worlds? How did we get those core beliefs? Everyone's got them, not just folks who are undergoing trauma. So how did that happen? That just kind of took root for me, and I realized that that was a research area that folks called meaning in life. It was a little obscure at the time. There were some big names like Laura King have been doing uh, some very, very cool work at Missouri, and Carol Riff had purpose in life as part of her incredibly influential psychological well-being scales.
Mhm.
But beyond that, no one was, it wasn't really being paid attention to in the big areas. So um, I had no plans to be a researcher, so I was just happy to absorb these ideas. But at the program where I was at, you needed to do an empirical, you need to be involved in research, right? So it was just a research-oriented counseling psychology program, and then I later joined a personality psychology program as well. So those are the two degrees I ended up with at the end of those 5 years. And at a certain point, I just realized that this fit who I was and what my life was, like kind of pursuing the questions I think are super interesting and trying to answer them as long as I could try to figure out something that could ultimately be helpful to people, then I didn't feel like I was turning my back on my duties, responsibilities as a person in this world. So it seemed like a great fit to really just run with something that was captivating to me that could potentially also um, deliver information or insights or perspectives that would be useful to folks in their lives.
Is that where you're still at now?
No, I'm in Colorado State University. It's not particularly common.
I meant,
Oh,
no, that's great. Happy that I was meaning in terms of your area of work. Are you still, because like myself, many people know you for the work you've done on meaning, and I'm just wondering if you've drifted off or not. You kind of seem to me that a person that wouldn't drift very far away from that in some way, but I'm just wondering where you're at the moment.
oh, I see. Yeah, I took it too literally. Where are you at right now?
Oh, I'm moving
In
down
my
south.
basements, yeah. Um, yeah, I don't think I'll ever be done with it. I think my interest in the area, or I should say what is feeling more energizing in the area of meaning and purpose right now is a lot more, I guess, interactive than the research side. I think there's some interesting questions that I could try to be part of answering. But, when I started and defended my dissertation, I the expectations were that I would know more or less by rote memory all of the papers that had been published. Because anything I cited or that existed could be asked of me in my dissertation defense. And I think there were don't think I can remember this many things now, but at the time I could. And I think there were about 320, 340 relevant papers as of 2005. And I think about six or 7,000 will be published this year, right? So
Wow.
the field has just exploded.
Hmm.
Um, so in a sense, no one has any idea what this field is about anymore. There's not really a true expert because no one can have read all of those things. We just try to understand the big picture, and I feel happy being a big picture guy. But the big picture oftentimes falls really short of making any kind of difference in the world. So I'm more energized by, so one example of what I'm energized by now is I'm putting together the World Meaning and Purpose Summit with Kiko Kislansky and Elena Marujo
Yeah,
in
yeah.
Lisbon, and that is, I think we're just we're just questioning every assumption about a conference and trying to figure out how can this be an inspiring place where every single person feels seen and heard in their perspective on the topic. And yeah, so like that gets me very excited more so than collecting more data. Like there's plenty of people collecting data out there, making those 6,000 or 7,000 papers get published. And so I like learning about the topic. In terms of what I want to I feel still a sense of obligation to use my position. I get a job that I think a lot of people would love to have, right? To be able to do things I think are interesting and meet fascinating, intelligent people. So I feel like I have to do something with that. And I've decided to shift over a lot more to trying to figure out what it takes to nudge people to be a little bit nicer to the
Mm.
planet that we all need to live on. I mean, so I've tried to nudge, put some ideas out there or join voices out there to nudge positive psychology and well-being sciences a little closer to thinking through our ultimate consequences. My little branch that I'm calling regenerative positive psychology, like how
Mm.
can the daily work of what we do related to positive psychology and well-being uh, not just improve people's lives individually, but like create better conditions for well-being and thriving at the systems level. And there's a lot of other amazing people who are doing work like that as well. So yeah, so I don't really know where things will go with the rest of my career. It's a strange time to be thinking about a career in academia in my country, but with every challenge comes the need to find new ways of doing things, and I hope I still got juice in the tank to do that.
So, I mean, 2005 isn't so long ago, kind of. It's what are we in now, 2025? So, you've done an enormous amount of work in that time. I know you're pretty good at karaoke as well. And I also know that you can turn up and give a great talk at 8:30 in the morning after singing great karaoke the night after. So you're pretty famous for that too in my books.
Hmm.
What do you consider to be probably your most important contribution? And I know people could look at you and say, okay, it's Mike Steger and it's going to be something around meaning. But what's something that maybe we don't know that kind of you're quietly proud of that has had an impact?
Hmm. That's interesting. I think two things that I'm proud of, and maybe don't pop to mind, although hopefully they feel recognizable for folks who know my work or have seen my talks. I think I am always as close as I can be to being fully genuine and sincere about what I'm saying. And I hope that also people see that I'm trying to be funny a lot and that I sometimes succeed. So I don't mind diving into difficult topics like death or suffering. Um, Feelings of hopelessness that we might all have, or the need to recognize when our efforts have not done enough to make the world a better place. So I think I'm genuinely not afraid to tackle big topics, but I'm also, I find it to be one of my character strengths anyways, and one of the places where I can be my most authentic is trying to be funny. So I don't mind making then shifting gears from the serious to the funny or the silly. And I think that that's just me being me. I don't plan out my talks super well. So a lot of times what's coming out, other than what's on the slides, which I obsess about, like what's coming out is usually not so prepared. It's what I'm feeling a little bit at the moment, um, with some landmarks. I mean, as full confession, the slides keep me on track. That's why I have them. And sometimes they let me slip in a joke or two. So yeah, I think they're just trying to be me, trying to represent what I think is true and why I think it is true and what I think is opinion and why I think that's an opinion. So I think that's something I'm proud of that I've just stuck to that, just stuck to kind of being me. And I think the
Mm.
folks that see me on stage are seeing what it's like to interact with me. And
Mm.
hopefully that's the case. That's something I value, and hopefully that's something that comes across. A second thing is that I'm attracted to thinking about kind of bigger, not bigger, wider view things, I would say. It doesn't make them bigger or better. It's just like I'm attracted to that. Like if we really zoom out, what's happening here? How do we position this in the context of other things? We live in a life right now that's I feel completely overwhelmed by details and minutia and like what's happening every 15 minutes in my schedule and losing track of all that stuff. And my inbox is a nightmare, and I don't have any idea how to get through the inbox for the days, in part because that stuff is just a little less magnetic to me than the bigger picture things. So um, I I I value that I've still managed to find time to zoom out and to try to point things out that I think are interesting about the big picture.
Yeah, because it could be so easy to hone in on the details. I tend to go quite deep and then have to trudge myself out to go, hang on, let's look at the
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, the big picture future stuff is a coping mechanism. Like I'm planning out which country would I move to if I could? Where, like, what would I want to be doing? What are the things if I could plan a dream vacation, what would I do? Like we're planning this 2025 meaning and purpose summit. I'm already like, oh, where should we do 2027? Like those
Yeah,
sorts of things are like coping. But
they
a
can
lot of the
be
big picture stuff,
overwhelming. They
what's
that
that?
that can also be overwhelming for me
A
because
little bit for me, not so much, but yeah, for
I
you.
yeah, because my if I get a bit of space, my brain just goes nuts with new fandangled things, and I go, and I'm heavily motivated to then go and action them. And I'm like, no,
Mhm.
and I have to work hard to rein myself in and go, just settle it down. You got enough on your plate. So,
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm not heavily motivated to action very much,
ah,
so I can easily while away time just in the abstract future. But the
mm,
abstract present tends to freak me out a lot,
ah,
like the big picture of what is happening in the world or my life, that tends to freak me out a lot. So then I do sometimes throw myself into the details because it feels like it feels like I have some sort of control or impact on the world if I can tick a few things off a to-do list. I don't think that's too strange, but yeah, so that the zoom, the telephoto, wide angle, like dance of my life can feel a little bit wild at times.
mm. It's a nice dance to have, though. That's your coping mechanism as well, isn't it? Because you like to take us in the dark spaces, and that's really unusual in the positive psychology space.
Mm.
So I think it's good that we have you to do that. And then you have to cope, have to bring yourself back out and actually buffer up and keep yourself on the straight and narrow and the healthy. Otherwise, we can, I think, become a bit too obsessed and not protect ourselves well.
Yeah. Well, it is. I appreciate you pointing out that issue, right? Because it's, we have a big responsibility of being alive and knowing that, we have just this life, whatever your, whatever your belief system is. I'm not aware of any belief systems that says that when we die in this life, we restart and it's exactly the same the next time around, right? There's no sort of inner craving to repeat every single thing that we've ever done with the exact same people in the exact same ways. So, if you believe that we're reincarnated, if you believe we go to heaven, if you believe that we just sort of our molecules return to the earth and are incorporated somehow into another creature, we're never gonna have this experience again with this cast of characters and we're cast in someone else's movie and all these sorts of things. It's completely unique and irreplaceable, and that puts a lot of responsibility on the idea that we should do something with this. Whatever ethical or moral imperative you feel, it is also a phenomenological imperative to do something that is worthy of this wild, kooky gift of being alive. And so it can feel like you have to open yourself up to everything, the ecstatic and the agonistic of everything, right? And we we're not probably most of us able to do that. Like it's
Mhm.
too hard. At least it's too hard for me. So I think the dark and the light and the lighthearted and the bleak and the big and the small. Like we all want to wander through there in a way that keeps us able to do good work, keeps us able to improve as people, keeps us able to love and support. So everyone's got a different steps to their dance, but yeah, I do. I also, there's just this topic of meaning was born as a psychological pursuit, anyways, out of suffering. And it's born out of a recognition that life is very, very difficult. It was born in the clinics. It was born in the concentration camps in the case of Viktor Frankl, or madness in the case of some of the other um, thinkers in this area, or war in the case of the earlier existentialists. And that's where it came from. It didn't come from happyology or positive emotions or even well-being, right? So one of the earliest debates that was happening that people were energized around was like subjective well-being versus psychological well-being, right?
Mm.
And Carol Riff and her psychological well-being model had purpose in there. But if you really unpack purpose, and go back to where that started from. Purpose was one of the the ways that we capture making meaning in our lives, and one of the three big ways that we do that is our approach to suffering, right? That right from the beginning, experiencing, creating, and suffering are the three paths to meaning from Frankl's view. So you can't bring that into positive psychology, I think, and just be like, rah, 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 let's go get purpose and we'll get all sorts of stuff done and we'll be so effective and blah, blah, blah. So I just don't think us existentialists anyways, we want to keep the dark side because to ignore it doesn't feel authentic.
Yeah, it's only half of what's around us. So, moving from all the little bit of the dark stuff to the protective stuff, and I've been thinking about ethics quite a bit and just over the recent couple of years, just because of some research that I've just recently published, and and I was thinking about, and even just drawing on my own personal life experience, actually, while I've been so heavily engaged in the ethics stuff from a practice perspective, just how nourishing it is. And I don't think people realize that to be living a life through an ethical lens could actually be nourishing, could actually support your well-being. And because it can be awfully bloody hard to do more than just think about it, and to do more than just be discerning about what could be and what should be, what shouldn't be, what could be. There's more to it than that. You have to actually take action on it. But I just want to know, because I have no doubt that you have a pretty good answer for me about ethics, your ethical thinking. You've already mentioned ethics and morals already, but have you got an example um, about when ethics played a role in your decision making and what happened?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there's little personal times all along where we want something and we tell ourselves that it's just not right, to have that. And that happens all the time in my life. Like I want to call in sick. I want, because I'm just tired, I'm frazzled, I don't want to do this job today, or I want to um experience something like highly pleasurable that might not be ethical or might not be part of an agreement I have with someone else, right? Like I'm supposed to go, let's say, meet a student to go over like their grade, which is excruciating, of course. And a colleague invites me out for beer. Well, the beer is a lot more fun than the conversation with the student. So there's all sorts of little things like that. I would say that I'm the jury is out on what happens next with the most recent decision that I've made, but I think the decision to try to shift my research out of what I'm known for. So I'm kind of known for meaning a purpose in life. My other research area that I'm kind of known for is meaningful work. And
Hmm?
I'm starting over in areas around sustainability and ecological behaviors where no one's ever heard of me, and
Mhm.
I don't know anything, right? So, but I just think that I like to use the example of two countries that border Russia, right? One is Finland, the happiest country in the world for like 8 years running. The other is Ukraine, where, it's we just had what, like 34 civilians were killed by a missile that dropped in the city.
Mhm.
And everything about life has been turned upside down.
Mhm.
And they're more or less on the same, longitude on the planet. They've been under this same similar sphere of influence, but at least over the 20th century. But one is the happiest country in the world, and the other one, people don't know if they're going to live or die every day.
Mhm.
And I don't think that our positive psychology interventions or our positive education or our meaning and purpose programs are what makes the difference between who's happy in Finland and who's happy in Ukraine. I just think the context is important and overwhelms what tools we have. So, if I think that there's contexts that are getting worse in the world that are going to wash away all this good work that we're trying to do, I feel like we really need to pay attention to it. And even if we just zoom out, yeah, so I could be a peace actor, I could be a peace scholar, I could be a politics scholar, I could be a weapons and military tactics scholar, I suppose, and that could do something. But the furthest zoom out that's going to make all this other stuff look completely silly is whether we have food, air, water, and life on the planet. To me, like that just turns up the volume on everything. So I don't know much about it. I don't know if I'll be able to contribute, but I had a sabbatical. I devoted it to meeting with people who are good at this area and trying to generate new research. All my research for this coming semester will be focused on these issues. Um, my graduate admissions philosophy is around this issue as well. So, I'm kind of giving up what you spend decades building, which is supposedly being seen as an expert, and I'm walking in like a like a total newbie into some other area. It could bear fruit. It could be a waste of time. It could be said that I should have figured out a way to work within my expertise area better. I will try to do that, but it just seemed like as much as I feel like I've had the good fortune to say that I've made some positive benefits and impact through my work over the last 20 years, uh, I see where I can potentially do more, and so I have to. So that's kind of where I'm stuck right now. It's like I wish I didn't, but and I could just coast and I could, retire somewhere. But I think I'm going to have to try to use the last chapter of my career, such as it is, to try to whatever I've got in my head to try to make that be helpful on a bigger problem.
My guess is you're probably going to find some overlap between the work of your last 20 years and the work coming. Um,
Or force there to be overlap, but yeah, I'm trying to I'm trying to start pure, right, in this other area with
yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how you walk that actually and where you
mm,
land. It'd be very interesting. So, I do have these questions that I am asking you, even though it's been this conversation that's kind of flowing. So the next one is about a challenge, and I've deliberately not used the word ethics in this question, and it is just about a challenge that you've had to face and then walk through. And if you have a specific example, you don't have to name people or organizations, etc. But if you had a specific example to share, just about what it was, what the conditions were and the context and how you went about it and what the outcome was. The outcome is not always good from some of my conversations. Some people have actually lost something because of it. But everyone's story is different.
yeah, I mean, I'll try to veer away from more current ones because the nature of some of these challenges particularly since I'm in a slow moving profession, academia, where it just, I don't know, it just feels like everyone's like moving in the mud and things don't move very quickly. So I want to talk about my current spot because I think it's just my perspective on things, and a lot of the folks, even for issues years ago, would still be around, right? So
Mhm.
instead I'll talk about the challenge that I had in my first job, which was at the University of Louisville. And one of the consequences of trying to march to your own drummer is that you end up studying things that other people think are pointless, right? So all the feedback I got when I started studying meaning and purpose um, was not good. It wasn't encouraging, and I know myself well enough to know that I can't do things that I don't think are interesting for very long. I can start them with a lot of energy and enthusiasm and conviction, and then I can't do it. So, um, I just felt also that at age 30 something, I was a grown ass human adult and I was gonna do what I want to do at that point. Just, I also felt that when I wasn't a grown ass adult, but it's still, like it just is like, I'm gonna do what I want to do. I'm sure it'll work out. Right. But yeah, it was like in my field of counseling psychology, which is where I had a potential for employment, like no one was doing that work, and it's not part of the traditional focal points of that field. So it was a little bit belatedly that I realized I was going to have a hard time finding a job, with even with a little bit more of a research output from graduate school than the people I was applying against, because they were teaching things and had expertise that was seen as relevant, and I didn't. So, um, so yeah, so it's interesting looking for those first jobs. I wouldn't say the University of Louisville was a bad place, but it was a different kind of program than I was used to. I was in a school of education, but I'd come from a department of psychology. They're different. The operating ideas were different. It was a transition time for that program, so I ended up with many advisees my first year, whereas normally you're trying to get your first one in your first year. I ended up as part of a team of folks who are working as the director of training. Normally, you don't start doing that until after tenure, definitely not your first semester. So there's some challenges. I couldn't do the research the way I was used to because they didn't have an undergraduate educational program, which meant I couldn't just go to a classroom and like spam a bunch of data off of college undergraduates in the United States. So everything was completely new, and overwhelming and just kind of hard to figure out how I'm going to launch a research career in this environment. At least doing the things I know how to do and answering the questions that I want to answer. I got a lot of support from folks there, but still there's gonna be a lot of wayfinding uh,
Mhm.
about that. So it was a difficult time, and I had the opportunity to apply for the job I'm in now.
Mhm.
And I guess normally in these cases, you're supposed to you do this particular dance, right? You're like, oh, I'm looking elsewhere, and then your current employer, that's how you get raises in academia, is you get an offer somewhere else, and then you tell your current employer, you're gonna lose me, and they're like, okay, well, here's your retention package, and you're like, yay, and then you say no to someone else. And that doesn't fit for me.
Mhm.
So I went to the boss at Louisville, who's no longer there, so I feel safe talking about this with no implication for that person's reputation. And I said, yeah, so I have this offer from Colorado State University, and I'm interested in it. And he starts the sort of retention conversation.
Mhm.
Said, No, that's okay. We can skip that part. I don't, I think this is probably the right move for me." And he got really mad.
Mhm.
And we'd had a really good relationship. We would hang out. It was social. He was sort of mentoring me through some areas. And the fact that I didn't engage with the notion that I would stay
Mm.
and put on that pretense, and I didn't have any intention of staying either, somehow created this huge rift, and I didn't really understand it, and that happens to me a lot. Like I'm like, oh, I guess the I have different assumptions, and those are problematic. So the challenge was, do I start going back and forth and try to get more money out of the new university or the old university? Like, is there any point in that? And it ended up that I didn't see a point to it. I didn't think it was fair. I didn't think it was honest. I didn't think it was ethical. I felt like the best outcome would be to scrounge a little bit more money out of my current employer. And I just wanted to move on. Like that felt like the goal I was really shooting for. I kind of wish I had gotten more money on my current employer, but but those weren't the reasons I was doing any of it.
Mm.
It ended up being a really difficult set of last months. The last time with my students, they didn't understand why I was leaving. I tried to be
Wow.
really open and have an open forum, and um, a lot of them were the ones who were the most furious with me were students that I hadn't admitted myself, but I'd kind of taken on. So I can imagine they've been passed along from person to person, but
Yeah.
I just tried to hear. I'm not always a good listener when people are criticizing me. I get defensive and I all these sorts of I get very activated and excuse me, it's hard for me to do. It was hard for me to hear the things that my former boss was saying to me. It's just hard to feel like my decision just to make a cold break was somehow hurting people so much.
Mm.
And yeah, the consequence of all that was I'm earning less money than I would have otherwise, which now feels relevant, but at the time, not so much. Sorry about that. It's high pollen season out here right now in Colorado, and um, I'm not in contact with most of those students. Somehow wasn't able to resolve all of that. Maybe the clean breakness made that easier for me too, then, right? It wasn't, I no longer felt the same level of responsibility, and maybe I should have, since I was there as a beacon of hope for them for a year in some cases too. But I felt like, and I'm still at the same job, like all these years later. Like I'm not, I realized that that's one of the very many reminders that I'm not a very ambitious or particularly career clever person. Um, but I do try to handle things the same way. Like,
Mm.
what are my motivations? Um, what am I hoping to get out of it? Are there games or tactics I'm supposed to use
Mm.
to do this? And how do I feel about that? Is that right for me? So I still don't do things the way that might be more clever, but I'm a little bit more prepared for the consequences, I guess. And I try to live with the consequences of doing that without feeling so stupid. Like it's really hard to not feel stupid when you don't go through the routines that other people go through to get ahead. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not blaming them for it. I'm just saying, like, when other people get ahead for doing things that I choose not to do, I feel like an idiot. So, yeah, I mean, I think to figure out a way to be okay with self-imposed limitations, mingling
Mm-hmm.
with other limitations, I think is the lesson I'm still struggling with, or I'm still learning. But that reminds me of that challenge time.
That's a really interesting story because I understand what you're talking about with not walking the walk that other people do to go wherever they want to go. They're quite intentional about trying to go somewhere, and so they will do things or say things, and I just like so anti that doing or saying just for the hell of it that um I think that's also hurt me across. I
Mm.
get it. I think it's hurt me across my time as well. And I'm like, well, I'm just still not going there. But I've actually come to come to accept that and sort of go, well, I was about to swear, but I'm not going to swear. But it's just, yeah, I've just come to, and I would say it's only been in the last few years that I've actually turned that corner myself and just, well, I don't give a shit, basically. I don't
Yeah.
care. This is like, if it doesn't happen with that person because they can't handle that I won't behave in a particular way that I feel it doesn't feel true to me, well, then that's kind of too bad. It's very,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think as a matter of prioritization, I think being me on my never-ending, seemingly, journey to smooth out my rough edges and try to grow to be a better person, that's still the main job of that I have of being alive.
yeah.
And I know that my life would be much more pleasurable if I'd figured out how to motivate myself to be a more ambitious person or to be more sustained in doing things that kind of yield benefits in terms of in a field like mine where, there's money and moving universities from time to time, which in my mind was moving my family, which I wasn't willing to do,
Yeah.
or selling books or getting more mo speaking money, having more social media following, like all those things are important, but and the folks who do them, I have respect for, and I know that with more that would bring more financial comfort or more different opportunities.
Mm,
But I kind of have to just have some compassion for myself because you know, I just know I won't do that. I see it's important. I agree. I nod my head. I'm like, yep, yep, totally. And I know I won't do that. And some of that is the ethics side of not saying things I don't mean or
mm,
not working with people or organizations that I think are evil or whatever. Not that I'm saying other people do that, um but a lot is just like I don't know. I have to believe that what makes me me and what that makes to some people my work interesting is the fact that it is me and I am only doing the things that I feel like I can do with fidelity. And
mm.
so it's a smaller, in some ways, little world that I'm living in, but it's all me at least. And I guess since that's important to me, I can only try to feel content with that. I can't scream at myself too much for not having this, that, or the other thing.
I think there's a huge amount of humility in what you're saying there because you're quite a name in and of yourself, but you're also one of those people that well, a lot of people know you who are in positive psychology. They know you because of meaning. So this is true. But you're also one of those other people that could easily skate through underneath. So I hear what you're saying that, but there's many of those people that do wonderful work as well.
Mhm.
So it's not a you have to be out there in the blazing lights to be having some impact for your work, because that's the way I see it anyway.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And I think that's also something that sometimes we all could be a little bit more careful listeners around, which is for me to say that that's my path, and I don't do what other people do, is not to say that I think what other people do or have achieved is bad. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like it's
Yeah.
just, yeah. And I think that I struggle to listen correctly when people say the same that reflects on me, right? So, yeah, there are bad people out there for sure, and there are bad famous people, and there are bad famous people in our area, right? But
Yep.
it's
Yeah.
not most people, and you can't reverse it, right? You can't say that because someone's famous and influential, they're bad. That's for sure not right. And you can't say that because there's people who aren't yet famous or who aren't yet influential, but are hustling, and trying to get there, doing things that I just find hard to do or
Mm.
not me. That doesn't mean that they're bad either. So it's just a lot of different paths and trying to own yours without trying to get the world to agree that yours is better. Like that's almost like the tension that I felt when I was a
Yeah.
kid. It was
Yeah.
like people aren't content with just their way of doing things being right for them. They want to get everyone else to agree that, yes, I'm on the right path, and then I don't know, whatever. Like I
Why
feel like,
aren't we all walking that way? Because it's right
yeah,
for me.
yeah. So yeah, just let me do my thing. I'm not hurting anybody. I'm trying to be good.
Mhm.
Nope, you have to be good this way, or you have to be that way. I feel like that's the existential battle of our times, is trying to force other people to value what we value instead of letting other people live other values out there that we need all of it, I think.
It can be the struggle to look through all of that mess that we have, the noise there, and just look through and just see the humanity.
Yeah. Yeah, like we could all be, why do we do anything that makes life harder for innocent people? Why? Why do we do that? It's
Yeah.
especially folks who go out of their way to do that. That's insane to me. But
Yeah. So I'm going to mosey on to the next question that I have for you. And, you've kind of touched on it around about, is my guess. And it is, but perhaps not as much as you might think when you go about answering it. And that is, what do you think, what would you hope for your legacy to be?
hmm, well, obviously a lot of really big statues. One legacy that I really would like is for all social functions to have chairs. Because I'm like almost 2 meters tall, and in those like spaces where everyone's talking at the same time, and my head is this is
Mm,
where the heads are, right?
mm,
For me, for the most part. And so this is where the mouths are, and this is where my ears are. And I'm like constantly like, what's happening? I don't know what's happening. So I want everyone to be sitting down. That would be a great legacy for every cocktail session, for everyone to be sitting down. Or standing on stools near me. That would be fun too. Like recognition of just how hard it is to be tall. Like that would be a great that'd be a great legacy. Uh so
I
it's interesting.
keep that in mind next time.
Yeah, I honestly often cannot have no idea what anyone's talking about unless I'm like looming over them. Like this is like I'm just like, what are you saying? So I feel awkward all the time. Um, one legacy. So I had a couple legacies that I think will never happen, and because I thought about like, what are my career goals? Like, I have a career now. I'm supposed to have. Often thought about life. Like career is just I think life first, and then career as a thing that's in my life, not career. I don't know. I'm not typical for that.
Mm,
But I did have one goal. One goal was I want to be a part of making meaning and purpose less of a weirdo thing that only weirdos talk about, and of a more recognition that it's just important. And I think over the course of my career, that's happened. And I think that uh, with all due humility, I can say that my work was part of that.
mm,
So that feels like I wasn't only a passenger, and I was helping drive some of it. And then I guess you could say the same thing for meaningful work, which was my second area. I think that's exploding right now, and I was there early, and other people are doing a lot more work than me now for sure. But yeah, so it feels good that like a lot of folks are talking about meaning and purpose in more serious ways.
mm,
Um, and it's not seen as like a weirdo thing to do that. It's pretty much mainstream. So that's really great. I I did want conversations about the meaning of life and the meaning of each person's life to feel as routine and safe
mm,
as talking about the weather or sports. I don't know if I've gotten there, and I'm not sure we will. I especially wanted in the looking over my time in the career that for kids, we would be giving them the tools they need to
Mm,
make meaning of life.
mm,
Because we're in a weird transition over the last few centuries of going from meaning being mostly passively absorbed to
mm,
now meaning uh, needing to be built and replenished on purpose.
mm,
And it's a lot for any individual to have to do, but it's especially a lot for a kid to do where the the ratio of meanings that are can be absorbed comfortably versus torn down or attacked is very low. And we're
mm,
not teaching them how do our brains make meaning? How do we figure out when a meaning's good for us? How do we figure out when a meaning's railroading us into something? How do we figure out how to be okay with not knowing? Like, I don't think we're particularly great at that. So that's something I probably need to lean into more.
mm.
Um, but yeah, in terms of legacy, I guess I don't think I will have one. I don't think people will bother, but if I guess I want people to know that I've tried my best and I've tried to be me and that that's fine. That's fine to do that yourself. Um, and it's fine to tackle questions that you think are interesting. And I don't know, I guess it's fine to make jokes about death, if that's another one. I mean, or sadness or all these sorts of things. Yeah, I don't know. Because I'm in the most honest way, I think it's unlikely that most of us will have any kind of professional legacy or public legacy. And so then my family is the one who would care at all if I have a legacy. I mean, I'll be dead, so it doesn't matter. But I hope that they similarly see that I've been trying to be better. How about that as my legacy? All this time I've really been trying to be better than. And so
You've been softening up the edges, smoothing out the edges, you said.
yeah.
That's what you said earlier.
Yeah, so when I stumble or make mistakes or am hurtful, it's it's against my own wishes too. How about that for legacy?
Yeah, and but I also heard there that your legacy being about us feeling that
Hmm.
we have permission to think about everything. We have permission to laugh at the absurdity, that we have permission to look into the dark, but be able to make fun of it as
Yeah.
well as laughing at what is just truly just lighthearted funny.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think along with that comes not just permission, but a kind of familiar embrace of not knowing,
Mhm.
being filled with questions, and having those questions be enough.
Without having the answers.
Mhm.
So this question we might be here for another half hour.
I promise. 20 words. 20 words. I'll limit myself to 20 words on this one.
What do you think is the most pressing issue in the field today? So we're not going to go world, national, anything like this. Just in our field of work, what do you think is the most pressing issue?
I think the most pressing issue is trying to find a way to cohere. Um, we're we're super diverse in our perspectives, in what we're trying to do, in who we're working with, and we haven't even really opened up the stage to most of the people who similarly care about the things that we care about. So we can only grow in terms of the diversity of thought, of practice, of orienting philosophies, and prioritization of what needs to be done first. So in that context, how do we really revel in and make space for an ever expanding set of ideas, perspectives, and voices while still coming together enough that what we're doing supports the good work that folks are trying to do? So I mean, like I can't really give any answers to it, but I think that's it, because if it gets too scattered, then people don't feel a sense of identity and they break off and they do something. Either they feel on their own or they um, find a different group to do it with. So the folks who care about trying to use knowledge of people and societies that orientates towards growth, goodness, and healing, it's a huge group of people and it's not within any one discipline. So we don't have labels often that pull us together. And as we continue to grow and learn, it's going to be even harder. So I think that's going to be a tricky thing.
Yeah. You know what came to my mind when you were telling me about just talking about that was, um, and ordinarily I'd be asking you, so what would you like to do about it? But I'm going, but he is. He's got his meaning and purpose get together in Portugal, and that's going to grow. And then it had me go reflecting in on myself and what I'm doing. And I go, well, yeah, that's what I want with the forum, like the Coaching Ethics Forum. It's like, it's this word, it's name of coaching ethic coaching. It's like, come on, it's more than coaching, right? For me, this is more than coaching. This is about the mentoring and the leadership. And I expanded it that way to just try and break the shackles of coaching. And
Hmm.
because we require everyone to come and have these conversations, and be in the space and feel okay to be in the space. So you're doing it. Maybe you've got something else in mind or another idea.
I mean, always. So, but yeah, so I think what you said was something that was simmering in the back of my head, because we're going to be people can't give their attention to everything. They can't give their time to everything. Yet we need people to be doing their work, their coaching or their mentoring or their leadership or their research or their presenting or whatever it might be. Um, and then throw a little time into fora or summits or groups or collaboratives, and they put a little bit of their energy into it, and that creates something that's bigger than everyone, right? But my suspicion is we need to figure out a way for collective to be part of multiple collectives
Mm-hmm.
and for to facilitate those collectives collaborating.
Mm-hmm.
And probably most of it's going to have to be voluntary, right? Because otherwise, once something turns into an official business or professional group, then it takes on its own interests of self-preservation. And the image that I had in my mind is like molecules. And I don't really understand this very well, right? But like molecules are held together by kind of sharing electrons. You
Mm-hmm.
never know where one electron is going to be. Like an electron in a water molecule doesn't belong to the oxygen, or it doesn't belong to the hydrogen. Any one electron could be in any of those, circling any of those nuclei, right? And so, like, yeah, water is better than for a lot of things than hydrogen or oxygen separately. Right?
Mm-hmm.
But somehow you had to make the oxygen, all these neutrons, protons, electrons, and then you got to put them, stick two of those, or one of those on two different hydrogens, and then what keeps it, that's a collective working, that's multiple collectives working collectively, right? But then you still have to go another level, right? And so there's other things that keep things sticking together as well. So like we have to be these little electrons, right? That can give a little bit of ourselves to many different things, um, and help those bigger things work together. Maybe is what I'm thinking. So your forum has to work with IPA, and IPA has to work with WAHASU, and WAHASU has to work with whatever this meeting thing is going to turn into, and that has to work with the conscious capitalism movement, and that has to work with, the well-being economy, and like there's all these groups out there, but they're run by people who are doing what the best they can at the electron level, and just trying to survive at the same time. So maybe the collective of collectives is maybe that's what it's going to take. I don't know.
Well, I think IPA's doing a pretty good job at the collective of the collective in relation to the forum. They've been
Mhm.
really kind, actually. And
Oh,
this year, it came out of nowhere. I'll talk about it. I just contacted one person that I know and said, listen, I've got this new awards launching this year. Do you think you could think of someone to nominate? It's the Champions of Courage Awards.
hmm.
And the response came back with, actually, do you mind if we put this in the IPA newsletter? And I'm like, hell yeah, go for it. Thank you so much. So, I mean, that was really lovely. That will come out
Awesome.
very soon. Whenever the next big email comes out in April, that's where it'll be. So,
Wonderful.
yeah,
Wonderful.
yeah. Well, our time is up. We probably could have chatted a bit more, but I'm due for a glass of wine and you're due for some more work. And I want to say thank you for joining me for this chat. I really enjoyed it. It's been good fun. I hope you enjoyed your time and found it valuable in your busy diary.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Wendy-Ann. And I hope that folks can pull some good stuff out of our conversation. I appreciate the questions and the intention behind them, and hopefully I didn't stray too far off the path.